Before you analyze anything, let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever reacted strongly to something small, and later wondered why it hit you so deeply? Or felt a wave of emotion that didn't seem to match the situation? Most people think those moments are random. Carl Jung disagreed. He believed that what we don't process doesn't disappear, it hides. It waits. It influences our behavior quietly, shaping our relationships, our boundaries, even the way we interpret silence. In a moment, you'll see 4 images. Don't overthink them. Don't choose the best one. Just notice which image pulls you in first. Because the one you feel drawn to may reflect a trauma you've adapted to, something you rarely talk about, maybe something you've normalized. This isn't about labeling you. It's about recognizing a pattern. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. So pause. Breathe. Look carefully. And choose the image that feels familiar, even if you don't know why. If you chose image 1, your response may be connected to abandonment sensitivity, not necessarily dramatic abandonment, but subtle emotional inconsistency. According to Carl Jung, early relational instability doesn't always register as trauma in the conscious mind. Instead, it becomes a behavioral pattern. Image 1 often attracts people who learn to anticipate emotional shifts before they happen. You read tone changes quickly. You sense distance before it's spoken. You prepare yourself internally before others even realize something has changed. That vigilance is not random. It is adaptation. At some point, you may have experienced unpredictability, affection that wasn't consistent, attention that fluctuated, reassurance that felt temporary. Instead of collapsing, you adjusted. You became perceptive, self-reliant, emotionally observant. But here is the shadow Jung would point to: hyper-awareness can quietly turn into anxiety. You may overanalyze pauses in communication. You may assume emotional withdrawal before confirming it. You might even test people unconsciously, looking for proof that they will stay. The trauma behind image 1 is not weakness, it is the fear of sudden emotional loss. And because you function well on the surface, most people don't see it. You appear stable, independent, logical. Yet internally, you track emotional safety constantly. The lesson here is integration. Awareness without self-blame. Recognizing that vigilance once protected you, but may not be necessary in every situation now. Growth begins when you differentiate past instability from present reality. When you allow connection without preparing for collapse. If image 1 felt familiar, it suggests your nervous system learned early to monitor closeness carefully. The question is not whether you were right to adapt. The question is whether you still need to live in constant anticipation. And that answer might change how you approach every relationship from this point forward. If you chose image 2, your response may be connected to emotional invalidation, the kind that doesn't look dramatic on the surface, but slowly reshapes how you experience yourself. According to Carl Jung, when emotions are repeatedly minimized or dismissed, they don't disappear. They move inward. They become self-doubt. Image 2 often attracts people who learn early to question their own reactions. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive. Maybe your concerns were labeled dramatic. Maybe your feelings were corrected instead of understood. Over time, instead of expressing emotion freely, you began filtering it. You analyze your reactions before sharing them. You downplay what hurts. You convince yourself it's not a big deal. But here's the shadow Jung would highlight: when you suppress emotional truth long enough, you start disconnecting from it. You might struggle to identify what you actually feel. Or you may intellectualize everything, turning pain into logic. On the outside, you seem composed, rational, balanced. Internally, however, there can be confusion, a quiet uncertainty about whether your needs are legitimate. The trauma linked to image 2 isn't chaos. It's dismissal. And dismissal teaches adaptation. You became agreeable, self-controlled, low maintenance. But at a cost. Because when emotional signals are constantly edited, authentic connection becomes harder. The lesson here is not to amplify emotion dramatically. It's to validate it privately first. To trust your internal response before seeking external confirmation. If image 2 stood out to you, it suggests your shadow holds unacknowledged feelings that deserve recognition, not from others initially, but from you. Growth begins when you stop negotiating with your own emotional reality. When you stop asking, "Am I overreacting?" and start asking, "Why did this affect me?" That shift alone can redefine how you relate, respond, and protect your inner balance moving forward. If you chose image 3, your response may be connected to performance-based worth, the belief, often unconscious, that your value is tied to what you achieve rather than who you are. Carl Jung observed that when identity becomes fused with productivity or success, the shadow begins forming around unexpressed exhaustion. Image 3 often attracts individuals who learned early that recognition followed results. Praise came after performance. Approval followed achievement. Over time, you internalized a pattern: to be valued, you must deliver. You likely appear driven, responsible, high-functioning. You set standards for yourself that others may not even see. But here is the hidden layer: when rest feels uncomfortable, when slowing down triggers guilt, when failure feels personal instead of situational, that's not ambition alone. That's adaptation. The trauma behind image 3 isn't necessarily overt pressure. It can be subtle conditioning. Maybe attention increased when you excelled. Maybe emotional connection strengthened when you succeeded. So you learn to maintain worth through output. Jung would describe this as over-identification with the persona, the external self designed to gain validation. The shadow here carries suppressed fatigue and fear of inadequacy. You may struggle to feel enough without proving something. Even in relationships, you might overfunction, solving problems, carrying weight, being the reliable one. But the question this image raises is crucial: who are you when you're not achieving? If that question feels uncomfortable, that discomfort matters. The lesson is not to abandon ambition. It is to detach identity from constant performance. When you separate self-worth from productivity, pressure decreases and authenticity increases. If image 3 resonated, it suggests your shadow isn't weakness, it's unacknowledged exhaustion from constantly earning space. And when you allow yourself to exist without performing, you may discover a version of yourself that doesn't need to compete to belong. If you chose image 4, your response may be connected to emotional self-protection, the kind that develops when vulnerability once felt unsafe. Carl Jung believed that when parts of us are rejected or misunderstood early on, we don't eliminate them. We conceal them. Image 4 often draws people who appear calm, controlled, even reserved. You likely think before revealing. You measure trust carefully. You don't open up quickly, not because you lack depth, but because depth once cost you something. Maybe honesty was used against you. Maybe expressing fear was met with silence. Maybe you learned that showing too much created distance instead of closeness. So you adapted. You became private, selective, independent. On the surface, this looks like strength. And in many ways, it is. But Jung would point to the shadow beneath that composure. When protection becomes automatic, connection becomes limited. You might crave deeper relationships while simultaneously resisting exposure. You may downplay your own needs to avoid feeling exposed. There can be a quiet belief that relying on others creates risk. The trauma linked to image 4 isn't dramatic chaos. It's emotional misattunement. And over time, that misattunement teaches restraint. The lesson here isn't to force vulnerability recklessly. It's to recognize that your nervous system may still be responding to past environments, not present ones. Protection once served you. But constant guarding can isolate you. If image 4 stood out, it suggests your shadow holds unexpressed softness, parts of you that want to be seen but wait for absolute certainty. Growth begins when safety is evaluated realistically, not historically. When you allow small disclosures without assuming harm. Because sometimes the door you're guarding isn't protecting you anymore, it's preventing the connection you've been quietly wanting all along. No matter which image you chose, notice something important. None of these patterns define you, they explain you. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is not a flaw to eliminate, but a part of the psyche waiting to be understood. Whether your choice reflected abandonment sensitivity, emotional invalidation, performance-based worth, or self-protection, each one points to adaptation. And adaptation means intelligence. At some point in your life, your mind made a decision to protect you the best way it knew how. That decision became a pattern. That pattern became a personality trait. And over time, it started to feel like identity. But identity is not fixed. The moment you become aware of a pattern, you separate from it. You move from automatic reaction to conscious choice. That is where transformation begins. Not in dramatic change. Not in blaming the past. But in observing yourself without judgment. Ask yourself, where am I still reacting to an old environment that no longer exists? Where am I protecting myself from a version of reality that may not be present anymore? Growth is not about erasing your shadow. It is about integrating it. Understanding that the traits you developed were once necessary, but may not need to run your life today. The power is not in which image you picked. The power is in what you do with the awareness now. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you understand the adaptation, you gain the ability to choose differently. That choice, conscious, intentional, and self-aware, is where real psychological freedom begins. If something in your result felt surprisingly accurate, or slightly uncomfortable, don't ignore that reaction. In behavioral psychology, the moments that trigger us often point directly to patterns we've normalized. The way you choose, the feelings you suppress, the roles you repeat, they're not random. They form a structure. And once you begin to see that structure clearly, your decisions start to change. That's why self-awareness isn't passive. It's practical. The more precise your understanding of your behavioral patterns, the less control they unconsciously have over you. Take a moment after this video ends to reflect on what stood out most. Not what sounded nice, but what felt true. Because insight without reflection fades quickly. But insight followed by awareness? That creates real internal shift. And this is only one layer. The more patterns you explore, the clearer your psychological map becomes. If this video made you reflect in a way you didn't expect, that means you're ready for deeper awareness. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next psychological test. Each one is designed to reveal patterns you might not consciously notice but are actively shaping your life. Leave a like if this resonated with you, because that tells the algorithm to bring this kind of insight to more people who need it. And I want to hear from you. Comment the number of the image you chose and whether the analysis connected with your experience. I read the patterns in the comments carefully. If you stayed until the very end, write your number and the word aware. That lets me know you're not just watching, you're paying attention. Also, click the video on the screen right now. It connects directly to what you just discovered and will deepen this understanding even further. And don't forget to check the full playlist curated specifically for self-discovery and shadow work. The more you understand your patterns, the more control you gain over your decisions, relationships, and direction. Stay curious. Stay observant. And I'll see you in the next analysis.